The female CEO in a sharp, tailored suit didn't even look at him twice when she fired him. "Get out. You're just a mechanic who thinks too much." The poor single father didn't argue. He simply wiped his hands, glanced once at the engine, and walked away. 10 minutes later, the entire factory went silent. Machines shut down. Screens flashed red. Engineers panicked. And then someone whispered, trembling, the only person who could have prevented this was the man she just fired. That was the moment the CEO realized she hadn't fired a mechanic. She had just fired the man who built the system. The Vantage Dynamics facility sat on the outer edge of Reston, Virginia, a place where the architecture itself announced its own importance. Glass and steel. Clean sightlines. The kind of building that said, "We do not make mistakes here." Inside Hall 7, the primary assembly floor, the air smelled of machine oil and fresh stress. Today was the kind of day that came once every 3 years. The kind of day that had been circled on calendars and whispered about in boardrooms since the last quarter's projections were filed. The V900 engine series, Vantage Dynamics' most ambitious project in a decade, was scheduled for its pre-certification test run at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. 14 months of development, 63 engineers. A contract with the Department of Transportation worth $340 million. Every supervisor in the building was wearing a pressed shirt. Marcus Hale was not wearing a pressed shirt. He wore a gray Henley with a small bleach stain near the left cuff, dark work trousers he'd had for 4 years, and steel-toed boots that had walked more factory floors than the combined total of everyone else currently standing in Hall 7. He was crouched beside Engine Unit 4, one of the 6 prototype units lined up along the south wall, his left hand resting lightly against the casing the way a doctor might rest a hand against a patient's chest. He had been there for 11 minutes. He had not been scheduled to be there at all. Marcus was contracted labor. Maintenance and diagnostics, third-party classification. His badge said Service Level C. That meant he fixed what broke and stayed out of the way when the important people were in the room. He pressed his fingers slightly harder against the casing. The vibration was subtle. Most people would have missed it. Most people, in fact, had missed it. The morning's standard diagnostic check had come back clean. 2 engineers from the thermal systems team had signed off on all 6 units an hour ago. Their clipboards sat on the supervisor's table, like small monuments to confidence. Marcus stood slowly. He looked at the thermal read on the portable gauge he'd borrowed from the supply cabinet. He looked at it again. He found Derek Osman, the floor supervisor, standing near the observation window speaking into his earpiece. "The Unit 4 casing," Marcus said, keeping his voice level. "There's a variance in the thermal output. About 4 degrees over baseline on the upper chamber. It's subtle, but it's building." Derek turned and looked at him with the particular expression that supervisors on days like this reserved for interruptions they didn't want. "The diagnostic came back clean this morning. I know. But the diagnostic measures static load. This is dynamic accumulation. The heat isn't dispersing evenly through the upper manifold. If you run that unit at full test capacity today, who authorized you to run a secondary check?" Derek asked. "No one. I was replacing a coolant line on Unit 6 and I noticed it." Derek looked at the engine. He looked at the diagnostic report. He looked at Marcus. The hierarchy of those 3 things was not ambiguous. "We've got 68 people in this building, and a federal certification team arriving in 4 hours, he said. "We are not flagging Unit 4 on the basis of a contract maintenance tech noticing a vibration. It's not the vibration, it's the..." "Marcus." Derek said the name the way people say names when they want the conversation to be over. Marcus stopped. He pressed his lips together once. He wrote a number on the edge of his work order sheet. 4 degrees Celsius variance, upper chamber, thermal build dynamic load condition, and set it on the table next to the diagnostic reports. Not loudly, not dramatically. He simply set it there and stepped back. He did not see the door open at the far end of the hall. Elena Ward entered Hall 7, the way she entered most rooms, slightly ahead of whoever was supposed to be leading her, moving at a pace that made the 2 people flanking her visibly uncomfortable. She was 41 years old, the youngest CEO in Vantage Dynamics' 30-year history. and she wore authority like a second skin. Her suit was the color of graphite. Her hair was pulled back with the kind of precision that suggested it had taken no effort at all. She had been on a call with the board since 6 in the morning and had not eaten lunch. Her presence changed the pressure in the room in a way that was difficult to explain and impossible to miss. She swept her gaze across the floor. Units, staff, timeline boards. She arrived at Derek, at the diagnostic reports, at the piece of paper Marcus had placed on the table. Then she arrived at Marcus. He was still standing near Unit 4. Gray Henley. Bleach stain. A man who clearly had not received the memo about pressed shirts. "Who is this?" she asked Derek. "Contract maintenance." Marcus Hale. He was replacing a coolant line and raised a concern about Unit 4. Elena looked at the diagnostic printout. "The unit passed this morning." "It did," Derek confirmed. She turned to Marcus with the specific expression of someone who has too many correct things to do today and is not interested in incorrect things. "You're the contract tech?" "Yes. You ran an unauthorized secondary check on a production unit 4 hours before a federal certification test. I noticed an anomaly while I was already there, which contradicts 2 signed-off diagnostic reports. The reports measured static load." "What I'm seeing is—" "What you're seeing," Elena said, "is a line of reasoning that has no business coming from someone whose job description ends at coolant lines." She held the pause for exactly the right amount of time, long enough to be deliberate, short enough not to seem theatrical. "I need people on this floor today who trust the process and the team we've built. Not people who manufacture problems the morning of a critical evaluation." "I'm not manufacturing anything," Marcus said. His voice was still level. It was the kind of level that costs something to maintain. "If you run Unit 4 at full test capacity today, it will fail. Probably within the first 20 minutes. The heat accumulation in the upper chamber has no clean dispersal path because the upper manifold valve is running at—" "Thank you," Elena said. It was not a thank you. It was a door closing. She turned to Derek. "Get him off the floor and process his contract termination." Today, Derek looked briefly, as though he might say something. He didn't. Elena was already walking toward the engineering team at the far end of the hall. Marcus stood still for a moment. He looked at Unit 4. He looked at the number he had written on the piece of paper, 4 degrees Celsius variance, still sitting on the table where he had placed it. He picked up his tool bag. He zipped it closed. He walked to the supply cabinet and returned the borrowed gauge. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He signed his name on the exit paperwork Derek's assistant brought him and accepted the termination notice with the same quietness he had offered everything else. At the door to Hall 7, he stopped for just a moment. He did not look back at the engines. He looked at the floor. Then he walked out. The late afternoon light was doing that thing it did in October, cutting low and gold through the trees along the service road, making even the chain-link fence at the edge of the parking lot look briefly beautiful. Marcus came through the outer security gate at 3:47 and saw her immediately. Lily was sitting on the concrete base of the fence post, her backpack between her feet, a book open on her knees. She was 8 years old, and she had her mother's hair dark and slightly curly, and her father's habit of complete absorption in whatever she was doing. She did not look up until he was close enough that she could hear his boots on the gravel. "You're early," she said. "Amy, Mrs. Pearson's carpool doesn't drop me off until 4:30 on Thursdays." She looked at him more carefully. She was 8 years old, but she had been reading faces for the last 3 years in the particular way that children learn to read faces when one parent has gone, and the remaining one is all there is. Something happened. "They didn't need me for the afternoon shift," Marcus said, which was true enough. Lily closed her book. It was a library copy of a thick engineering reference guide for middle schoolers. She had checked it out 4 times in the last 2 months, and Marcus had stopped pretending to be surprised. "Did you fix the thing you were fixing?" "I tried." She stood up and shouldered her backpack. "But did it work?" He reached down and straightened the strap on her bag where it had twisted. "Not today," he said. They walked toward the bus stop. Lily put her hand in his, not because she was afraid or uncertain, but because it was the thing she did, had always done, even now that she was in third grade and technically too old for it according to several of her classmates. Marcus's hand closed around hers, and they walked without talking for a while. The bus ride took 22 minutes. They sat in the second row from the back, because Lily liked to watch the other passengers. She was conducting some private study of humanity that she had not yet fully explained to him, and he had learned not to interrupt it. On the bus, Marcus looked out the window at the passing strip malls and medical offices and thought about the thermal variance in Unit 4's upper chamber, 4 degrees Celsius above baseline. Dynamic accumulation under load conditions. The upper manifold valve running at a compression ratio that the original spec had called for on a sea-level installation, but Vantage's testing protocol was running internal pressures 20% higher than sea-level conditions to simulate altitude stress. He had done the calculation 3 times since that morning. He had arrived at the same number each time. 23 minutes, give or take. After 23 minutes of full test load, the heat in the upper chamber would exceed the relief threshold. The valve would either lock or blow. Either way, the unit would go down hard. He looked at Lily, who was watching a man in a business suit 2 rows ahead of her, with the scientific attention of a naturalist observing a rare specimen. He had been an engineer once, not a contract maintenance tech, not a service-level C badge, but a principal engineer, the kind who had his name in the design credits and got invited to the review meetings and was consulted when the system didn't behave. He had led the thermal management design on a turbine project for a firm in Maryland for 4 years. He had been good at it. Then Claire had gotten sick, and then Claire had died. And then there had been Lily, who was 5 years old and needed a father who was present and not traveling to client sites every other week, and the math of that had worked out in a particular way. He was not bitter about it. He had made the choice consciously, and he would make it again. But some days the knowledge of what he could see that other people couldn't sat in his chest like a stone. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on Culver Street that had a leak in the stairwell ceiling that the landlord kept promising to fix. The carpet in the hallway was dark green and very tired. Their apartment itself was clean. Marcus cleaned it with the same methodical attention he gave to anything mechanical, and it had large windows that caught the afternoon light. Lily dropped her backpack at the door and immediately went to the small shelf in her room where she kept her drawings. She came back with a piece of paper, slightly crumpled, and held it out to him. He looked at it. It was a drawing of a man in work clothes with a large wrench, standing next to what appeared to be a very complicated machine. The machine was drawn with considerable detail for an 8-year-old gears and tubes and small labeled parts, the labels written in Lily's careful, block-letter handwriting. Above the drawing, in crayon letters, "Dad fixes everything." Marcus looked at the drawing for a long moment. "I made it at school," Lily said. "For the family project." Mrs. Pearson put it on the wall. He folded it carefully and put it in his chest pocket. "Does it make you feel better?" "Yeah," he said. "It does." He made dinner pasta and a simple tomato sauce, bread he had bought that morning, and they ate at the small kitchen table, while Lily told him about a disagreement she had had with a boy named Preston over the correct way to divide fractions and why she was right and he was wrong, and how she had explained it to him with a diagram on the back of her homework sheet, and he had still refused to agree, which she felt was a moral failing more than an academic one. Marcus listened. He asked the right questions. He laughed at the right moments. After dinner, after Lily was in bed with her library book, he sat at the kitchen table for a while in the quiet. He thought about Unit 4, and then he thought, it's not my problem anymore. He went to bed. At 2:09 p.m., Elena Ward stood in the observation room above Hall 7 and watched the V900 test sequence begin. She had a glass of water in her hand that she was not drinking. Beside her stood Raymond Cho, Vantage's chief engineer, and Pamela Strickler from the Federal Certification Team, who had flown in from Atlanta and had a connecting flight at 7. The observation room was elevated, climate-controlled, and separated from the test floor by reinforced glass that was technically rated for blast containment. Though no one liked to say that out loud, below, the 6 prototype units were coming online in sequence. The sound was enormous, even through the glass, a building, layered roar that Elena had always found secretly satisfying, the sound of something powerful doing what it was built to do. Unit 1, clean, Unit 2. Clean. Unit 3. A brief hesitation on startup. 2 engineers converged, checked, cleared it. Clean. Unit 4. Unit 4 came online at 2:14 p.m. and sounded like the others. At 2:17 p.m., the thermal readout on Unit 4 ticked up slightly. The engineer monitoring the thermal station glanced at it, glanced away. It was within acceptable range. The acceptable range had been set based on the standard diagnostic protocol. At 2:19 p.m., the readout ticked up again. The engineer's name was Brett Calloway. He was 27, 3 years out of his master's program, and this was the most important test he had ever been part of. He stared at the number on the screen and felt something tighten in his sternum that he did not want to name. He thought about the man who had been walked off the floor that morning. If you run Unit 4 at full test capacity today, it will fail. He picked up his radio. He put it back down. The diagnostic had been clean. 2 senior engineers had signed off. The CEO was watching from the observation room. He picked up the radio again. At 2:21 p.m., Unit 4 produced a sound that was different from the other units. It was not dramatic. It was a shift in pitch, a slight tightening of the upper register of the engine's roar, the kind of thing that most people in the observation room would not have noticed. Elena noticed. She looked at Raymond. Raymond was already looking at the floor. At 2:23 p.m., exactly 23 minutes after the test sequence had begun, Unit 4's upper manifold pressure relief valve locked. The heat that had been building in the upper chamber since startup, the 4-degree variance above baseline, the dynamic accumulation that a static diagnostic would never catch, found no dispersal path and went somewhere else. There was a contained explosion, not catastrophic. The safety systems, the ones that Marcus had not touched, that had worked exactly as designed, contained it within the unit housing. No one was injured, but the unit was destroyed. And in the shockwave of the contained blast, something happened to the primary coupling that connected Unit 4 to the shared drive system. The coupling sheared, and the shared drive system, now mechanically compromised, began an emergency shutdown that cascaded across all 6 units. One by one, the engines in Hall 7 went silent. The test floor went quiet. Red lights cycled on across every monitoring station. Elena stood at the glass and looked down at 6 dead engines, and the silence where $340 million had been standing 20 seconds ago. For approximately 4 seconds after the cascade shutdown completed, no one in the observation room said anything. Then Raymond Cho said, very quietly, "Pull everyone off the floor." The next 90 minutes were the kind of 90 minutes that leave permanent marks on an organization. The federal certification team withdrew to a separate conference room with the kind of polite efficiency that meant the 7 o'clock flight was no longer a concern because nothing that had been planned for today was going to happen today. Raymond put his best thermal systems engineers on the damage assessment for Unit 4 and got back results that were, if anything, worse than what the blast itself had suggested. The upper manifold valve had not simply locked, it had locked because the valve seat had been deforming under load since startup. A process that the static diagnostic had been completely unable to detect. Elena sat at the head of the engineering team's emergency meeting and did not look like herself. She looked like a person standing in a room that has fewer walls than it did an hour ago. "Can we repair it?" she asked. "The unit?" "Yes. Probably. But that's not the issue," Raymond said. He was being careful with his words, in the way that careful people are when they're delivering news that is going to land hard. "The issue is that we don't fully understand why the valve seat deformed. We have 4 theories, and we're not confident in any of them. And without understanding the mechanism, we can't certify that the other 5 units don't have the same vulnerability." Silence. "How long to diagnose?" "Could be a week. Could be 3. Raymond paused. "The contract has a 60-day cure window for certification failures. After that, the DOT can void and rebid." Elena looked at the table. Everyone in the room was looking somewhere that wasn't her face. "Who was the contract tech this morning?" she said finally. "The one on Unit 4. The room shifted. Derek Osman, who was sitting 2 seats down, said, Marcus Hale. He predicted this. It was not a question. Derek answered it anyway. He raised a concern about thermal variance in the upper chamber. Dynamic load accumulation. He mentioned the upper manifold valve specifically. Elena set her pen down on the table. She set it down carefully, in the particular way of someone who would rather be doing something with their hands that wasn't this. What do we know about him? Contract maintenance. Third party. He's been on the rotation here for about 8 months. Derek hesitated. That's actually most of what's in his file. He came through a staffing firm. The file is thin. Does he have engineering credentials? That's what I'm saying, I don't know. The file is thin. Brett Calloway spoke from his seat near the door. He had been quiet since the Cascade shutdown, and he had the look of a person who was going to say something whether or not it was comfortable. He said he designed the system, Brett said, or something like it. He said he understood why the upper manifold was failing. He wasn't guessing, he was doing the math. He paused. I should have called it in when I saw the thermal variance climbing at 217. I didn't. More silence. Find him, Elena said. Finding Marcus Hale turned out to be harder than it should have been for a company the size of Vantage Dynamics. His contract file. When Julia Merritt, from HR, pulled it up at 4:15 p.m., was exactly as sparse as Derek had indicated. Name. ID number. Staffing agency reference. The staffing agency had his contact number a cell phone and called it on Vantage's behalf. The call went to voicemail. The voicemail did not identify the owner. His address in the system was a P.O. box, which was, Julia noted, unusual but not prohibited under the contractor agreement. He's a private person, said Dale Rooney, the head of building security, who had walked out to the parking lot with Elena at 4:45 p.m. and was now helping her think through this. Dale was 62 and had been with Vantage for 19 years and had the calm, observational manner of someone who has watched a great many crises come through and has never started one himself, kept to himself mostly. Showed up, did good work, left. Never saw him at the lunch tables or the break room. You know him. I know faces. Dale paused. He came in some mornings with his daughter, little girl. He'd drop her at the gate before coming in the carpool from her school, picked her up in the afternoon. She'd wait by the fence post if it was running early. Elena looked at the fence post. A concrete base. A few feet of chain link. She tried to imagine leaving a child at a fence post while you went in to fix other people's machines. The school carpool, she said. Do you know which school? No. But I've seen the van. It's blue. Elementary school run. The kid had a backpack with a NASA patch on it. Elena looked at Dale for a moment. That's all I have, Dale said. She called Raymond. I need someone to find an elementary school in this zip code that runs a carpool van. There was a pause on the other end that suggested this was not a category of crisis Raymond had prepared for. I'll make some calls. The address they eventually traced through the school's shuttle run records, through a parent directory, through 2 phone calls that tested the limits of what could be asked politely at 5:30 on a Thursday afternoon, was 4471 Culver Street, apartment 3C. Elena drove herself. She did not bring Derek or Raymond or any of the 3 people who had offered to accompany her with the specific energy of people who wanted to be present for whatever was about to happen. She drove a company car she never usually drove, a plain black sedan that felt too big for the residential street she turned onto at 6:11 in the evening. Culver Street was the kind of street that had been built in the 1970s with modest intentions and had more or less kept them. The apartment building at 4471 had a cracked concrete stoop and a buzzer panel where 2 of the buttons had been labeled in different handwriting from the others. The stairwell smelled of old carpet and someone's cooking something with garlic, something warm. She found 3C at the end of the 3rd floor hallway and knocked. There was a pause. Then a child's voice said, Dad. Someone's at the door. And then Marcus opened the door. He was still in the gray Henley. He had washed his hands, but there was still a faint trace of machine oil in the creases of his knuckles. The kind that doesn't fully come out. He looked at Elena, and his expression went through several things very quickly: surprise, recognition, a careful reassembling of neutrality. Behind him, in the small living room, Lily was sitting on the floor with a toy bicycle partially disassembled around her. She was holding a small wrench and looking at Elena with frank curiosity. "Miss Ward," Marcus said. "Mr. Hale." Elena stood in the hallway and became suddenly aware of how strange it was to be here at this door. In this building, in this corridor, with its tired carpet in a graphite suit that cost more than this month's rent probably cost him. "May I come in?" Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he stepped back from the door. The apartment was small and clean. There were books on shelves, not decoratively, but the way people shelve books when they actually use them, organized in a system that made sense to the inhabitant. There was a drawing on the refrigerator, a complicated machine with labeled parts, and a man standing next to it. "Lily," Marcus said, "can you give us a few minutes?" Lily stood up, still holding the wrench, and looked at Elena with the forthright assessment of a child who has not yet learned to pretend. "Are you the one who made my dad leave the big building today?" Elena met the child's eyes. She was 8 years old, and her gaze had no hostility in it, only the honest curiosity of someone who wanted to understand. "Yes," Elena said. "I am." Lily considered this. "Did you come to say sorry?" There was a silence that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. "I came to ask for help," Elena said. Lily looked at her for another moment. Then she looked at her father. Then she took her wrench and went to her room without further comment. Marcus gestured toward the 2 chairs at the kitchen table. They sat. "Unit 4 failed," Elena said, "at the 23-minute mark." "I know." A pause. "I heard the cascade would take the whole shared drive system." She looked at him. "You knew about the coupling too?" "I knew what happens when a primary manifold lock transmits shock load through a shared coupling at that RPM. It's not a separate problem. It's the same failure propagating downstream." Elena set her hands on the table. "Mr. Hale, I need to understand who you are." "The staffing file is thin," he said. "I know. Were you an engineer?" "I am an engineer," he said, not correcting her with heat, just accurately. She waited. "I ran the thermal management design on the Carrington turbine project for 4 years. Before that, I was on the propulsion systems team at Dayton Murray for 3 years. I left the industry in 2019. He said it plainly, with no drama attached to it. I wasn't hiding. I was just doing the work that was available while I raised my daughter." Elena looked at the refrigerator, at the drawing. "I need you to come back," she said. "I need you to look at the other 5 units and tell me if they have the same vulnerability." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table. "The federal certification window is 60 days, Elena said. "If we can't diagnose and remediate within that window, we lose the contract." "I know about the certification window." "Then you know what I'm asking." "I know what you're asking," Marcus said. "But you fired me this morning because I told you the truth, and you did it in front of your engineers, in front of your team, in a way that was designed to communicate that I didn't matter enough to listen to." He said it without bitterness. As a fact, the way he had quoted temperatures and compression ratios because it was accurate and accuracy was what he had. "So I'm trying to understand what's changed, whether it's the situation that's changed or whether something else has." Elena looked at him. In the 27 years of her career, she had sat across from a great many people and held a great many silences. She was good at silences. She used them strategically, let them expand until the other person filled them with something she could use. It was a tool, and she was skilled with it. But sitting in this kitchen, at this table, with this man who was looking at her with the same level, waiting patience he had used that morning when he was trying to warn her about Unit 4, she found that she had nothing to put in the silence except the truth. "The situation has changed," she said. "I would be lying if I said otherwise. I came here because I need the problem solved." She paused. "But I also came because I was wrong this morning. And I know that. And I'm not in the habit of knowing things I don't act on." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "My daughter needs to be picked up at 3:15, he said. Every day. That doesn't change. Understood. And I'm not interested in a title or a spotlight, or being the story you tell at the quarterly meeting about how Vantage turns things around. Also understood. I'll look at the other 5 units. If the vulnerability is the same, I'll tell you exactly what it is and what it requires to fix it. What you do with that information is your business. Elena nodded. From the hallway, almost inaudible, came the sound of a small wrench being set down on a wooden floor. Neither of them mentioned it. She did not sleep well that night. She had been in crisis mode before. She was good at crisis, at the rapid triage of information, the decisive cutting of losses, the management of multiple moving parts under time pressure. Crisis, she had always thought, was where she was most herself. But this felt different. It had the texture of something that had been wrong before the crisis. Something that the crisis had only made visible. At 10 p.m. she accessed Vantage's internal archive system from her laptop. She searched Marcus Hale. What she found took her until 1 in the morning. The Vantage V-Series engine program had been launched 6 years ago. Under the previous CEO and a different engineering leadership team, the core thermal management framework, the architecture that governed how heat moved through the V900's chambers and how the pressure relief systems integrated with the manifold, had been designed by an external consulting team in the program's first year. The lead consultant on that team had been named Marcus Hale. His design documents were still in the archive. 1,200 pages of them, detailed, methodical, and annotated with the particular care of someone who wanted the people who came after him to understand not just what, but why. In the margins of page 412, in a section about dynamic load management for altitude stress testing, he had written a note for future protocol development. Static diagnostic will not detect thermal accumulation variance under dynamic load conditions above 15% standard pressure. Recommend dynamic load testing protocol as mandatory pre-certification step. The note had been filed. The archive had preserved it. Nobody had acted on it. And then this was the part that sat in Elena's stomach like cold water. She found the project attribution record, the document that listed who had contributed what to the V-Series program for the purposes of IP registration and internal recognition. Marcus Hale's name was not on it. She stared at the screen for a long time. The attribution record had been filed by the previous VP of Engineering, a man named Craig Purcell, who had left Vantage 3 years ago for a competitor. He had structured the attribution to fold the external consulting team's contributions into the general program record under Vantage's own engineering team's names. It was, technically, within the terms of the consulting contract. It was also, Elena thought, the kind of thing that was technically within the terms of a contract and also definitively wrong. The man whose design she was running had been erased from the record of it. He had come back as a contract maintenance tech. Service level C. And when he had tried to tell her that her system was failing, she had fired him. She closed the laptop. She sat in her home office in the dark and looked at nothing for a while. Marcus arrived at the Vantage facility at 7:45 the next morning. He used his old badge Elena had called ahead to have access restored and walked through the security checkpoint without ceremony. He went directly to Hall 7. The floor was quiet in the way of aftermath. Unit 4's housing had been partly opened for the damage assessment team. The other 5 units stood in their places, offline, waiting. The air still had that faint electrical smell that comes after something has discharged more energy than it was supposed to. Elena was there. She had arrived at 6:30 and had been standing near the monitoring station, looking at the thermal records from the previous day. She had a coffee cup in her hand that appeared to be mostly full and mostly cold. She watched Marcus walk across the floor toward Unit 2, not Unit 4. Not the one that had failed, but Unit 2, and set his bag down and open it. He took out a thermal gauge and a small device she didn't recognize. "What's that?" she asked. "Dynamic load simulator," he said. "Small scale. I built it." He attached the device to the Unit 2 casing with a practiced economy of movement. "It induces a controlled pressure variance. Lets me see how the thermal distribution responds under simulated load without actually running the unit." He worked in silence for a few minutes. She watched. Then she said, "I found your design documents in the archive last night." Marcus paused in what he was doing. "Just for a moment. The thermal management framework," Elena said. "The manifold integration architecture. The note about dynamic load testing, on page 412. He did not turn around. He continued with the device. "You were reading at midnight? I was reading at midnight." She set the coffee cup down on the supervisor's table. "Your name isn't on the attribution record." "I know. Craig Purcell removed it. I suspected." A pause. "I didn't have the leverage to contest it at the time. I was gone by then." "You were gone because I left the industry," he said. "That part was my choice. The attribution was someone else's." Elena looked at the unit beside her. The clean steel housing, the system that had been built on a design that Marcus had made and had been stripped of his name before anyone currently at Vantage had ever known to look for it. "I want to restore the attribution," she said. "Formally. In the project record and in the IP registration." Marcus turned then. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not suspicion, not gratitude. Something more contained than either. "Why?" "Because it's accurate," she said. "And I run a company based on accurate records." He looked at her for a moment. "That's a better answer than most people would give. I also want to say." She stopped. She started again. "What I did yesterday morning was wrong. Not just wrong as a business decision, though it was that too. Wrong in the way I did it. I used your termination to make a point about hierarchy in front of my staff." She said it clearly, without the hedges and qualifications that usually surrounded statements like this in professional settings. "You had already shown me the same patience you showed the thermal systems when you were trying to tell me the problem. I wasn't interested in being right. I was interested in not being challenged." She paused. "I'm saying this because it's true and because you deserve to hear it said plainly. Not because I need something from you right now." Marcus looked at her. The room was quiet around them. "You're better at this than I expected," he said. "At apologizing? At saying the actual thing." There was a pause that was different from the silences of the previous day, not strategic, not weighted. Just the ordinary pause of two people who have reached a point of basic honesty and don't need to fill it. "The other 5 units have the same vulnerability," Marcus said. He turned back to the device. "All of them. Different stages of progression. Unit 2 is early. Unit 6 is close to where 4 was yesterday. But the manifold seat deformation is systemic. It's a material spec issue in the original manufacturing run. The valve seats were machined to tolerance for standard pressure conditions. The altitude stress testing protocol runs them at pressures they weren't spec'd for." Elena closed her eyes briefly. "How do we fix it?" "You replace the valve seats across all 5 units with seats machined to the higher pressure spec. Then you revise the diagnostic protocol to include a dynamic load check at 3 pressure levels before any certification run." He paused. "I wrote that recommendation 6 years ago. It's on page 412. "I read it," she said. "I know. He worked for 4 days. He did not work alone. There were engineers assigned to assist him. Material specialists. A machining team that ran the new valve seats to his specifications. But the work was organized around Marcus, the way a complicated mechanism organizes itself around its load-bearing element. He was the point from which all the other work radiated. He was not dramatic about it. He arrived at 7:45 each morning and left by 3 o'clock to pick up Lily from school. He didn't give speeches or presentations. When he needed something, a specific tool, a material certification, a pressure test result, he asked for it in the same level voice he used for everything. And the thing arrived, because people had stopped second-guessing him by the end of the first day. Brett Calloway became his shadow by the second day. Not officially, Brett was still assigned to his own station, but he would appear near wherever Marcus was working, watching, asking quiet questions that Marcus answered with the patience of someone who genuinely liked explaining things when the person asking was genuinely trying to understand. On the morning of the 3rd day, Marcus found a note on the supervisor's table next to his tool bag. It was from Brett. It said, "I should have called it in at 2:17. I'm sorry." Marcus folded the note and put it in his pocket. He did not make it into a moment. He just kept working. Unit 6 was the most technically demanding. The valve seat deformation was advanced enough that the housing had to be partially disassembled to access the manifold cleanly, and the reassembly tolerance was narrow enough that it required 3 separate verification checks. Marcus did all 3 himself. He worked through the 3rd check with the particular concentration of someone who has reached the part of the problem where there is no margin for approximation. When he was done, he ran the dynamic load simulator one final time. The thermal distribution registered within expected parameters across all 5 chambers. The manifold pressure held through all 3 simulated load levels. He took the simulator off the casing. He put it back in his bag. He straightened up. The floor had gone quiet around him. He hadn't noticed the gathering the engineers and technicians who had drifted in over the course of the last hour, who were now standing in loose clusters around the perimeter of the work area, watching. He looked at the unit. He looked at the monitoring screen. He looked at the numbers, which were exactly what they should be. He picked up his bag. He nodded once at Brett Calloway, who was standing 6 feet away with an expression that suggested he had learned something this week that was going to take a while to fully locate in himself. He walked toward the door. Elena was standing near the observation window. Not in the window, she had come down to the floor, which she had done each day he was there. She had watched more than spoken. She had learned more than she had managed. This, he suspected, was not a small thing for her. She didn't applaud, neither did anyone else. The room stayed quiet. She met his eyes as he walked past. He nodded. She nodded back. The formal attribution restoration took 11 days to process through Vantage's legal and records department. Elena signed it herself and had it filed in both the project archive and the IP registration record. She also commissioned a technical review of the V-Series diagnostic protocols, with a mandate that the recommendations in Marcus's original consulting documents, including the one on page 412, be formally incorporated into the certification prep process going forward. She did not issue a press release about it. She did not call a company meeting to announce it. She sent Marcus a copy of the restored attribution document by email, with a single line. "This should have been accurate from the beginning. It is now," he replied with, "Thank you." That was the entirety of their correspondence for 2 weeks. The federal certification team returned on a Tuesday in late November. The test sequence ran all 6 units at full certification load for a duration of 45 minutes. All 6 units performed within specification. The thermal distributions on all 6 units tracked within 2 degrees of baseline across the entire run. Unit 4 ran clean. The DOT certification was granted. Raymond Cho sent a building-wide communication that was restrained and professional and contained, in its final paragraph, a sentence that read, "This outcome was the result of work done by many members of this team and by individuals outside the immediate team whose contributions we are glad to recognize." It was the kind of sentence that had been written carefully. Elena read it. She thought about sending him a note, asking him to be more specific. She decided against it. Some things moved at their own pace. On the Wednesday after the certification, she drove to Culver Street. She had not called ahead this time. She rang the buzzer and waited. Lily answered the intercom. "Who is it?" "Elena Ward. I was here a few weeks ago." A pause. Then, "I'll tell Dad." Marcus buzzed her up. He was in the kitchen when she came in. He had been cooking something. The apartment smelled of butter and onions and something herby. Lily was at the kitchen table doing homework, pencil in hand, the concentration on her face absolute and slightly fearsome. "We got the certification," Elena said. "I heard," Marcus said. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen. The drawing was still on the refrigerator. "Dad fixes everything." She looked at it. "I want to offer you a consulting contract," she said. "Ongoing. Your terms, your schedule, your rates. No title, no office, no obligations beyond the scope you define. We have 3 other programs in development that have thermal management components. I'd want you available for design, review, and diagnostic consultation when it's relevant. Marcus stirred whatever was on the stove. He did not look at it, he was looking at her. "You don't need to do this to square things," he said. "I know. I'm doing it because you're the best thermal systems engineer I've encountered in 15 years in this industry, and I am not in the habit of leaving that kind of capability unretained because of things that happened in the past." She paused. "I am trying to get better at running a company that doesn't operate on assumptions about who has something worth hearing. That's a harder change to make than restoring an attribution record," Marcus said. "Yes," she said. "It is." Lily looked up from her homework. She had been listening to all of this with the focused, lateral attention of a person who is engaged in their own task, but tracking a parallel conversation with equal care. "Are you going to keep coming back?" she asked Elena. Elena looked at the child. "That depends on your father." Lily looked at her father. She said, "Sorry." Lily said, "Like an actual sorry." Marcus looked at his daughter for a moment. "Yeah," he said. She did. He turned back to the stove. He adjusted the heat under the pan with the same careful, calibrated attention he gave to everything mechanical. "I'll look at the contracts," he said. "If the terms are right, yes." Elena nodded. She looked at the refrigerator again, at the drawing with its labeled gears, and the man with the wrench. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" Marcus asked. He asked it neutrally, the way he offered things as a simple extension, without pressure. Elena looked at the small kitchen table with Lily's homework spread across it, and the 2 chairs and the pan on the stove. "Another time," she said. "But thank you." She walked back down the hallway, down the 3 flights of stairs with the leaking ceiling and the tired carpet, and out into the cold November evening on Culver Street. She sat in her car for a moment before starting it. Through the lit 3rd-floor window, she could see the shadow of the kitchen, the warm light from the overhead fixture, the shapes of a man and his daughter at a table. She couldn't see detail from here, just the light. She thought about what it cost to do the work correctly. The real work, not the technical work, which Marcus had done with a completeness and quiet authority that had rearranged her understanding of what expertise looked like. The other work, the work of looking at a system you're running and asking honestly whether the assumptions in it are accurate, whether the people who have something essential to offer are being heard, whether the hierarchy you've built is selecting for the right things. It was harder than fixing a manifold valve. It had more moving parts. The tolerances were less forgiving. She started the car. 3 weeks later, she hired a new position, Director of Technical Assessment, open to candidates from all tiers of Vantage's workforce and extended contractor network. The job description specified that the role was designed to identify and elevate technical expertise regardless of origin, and that candidates would be evaluated purely on demonstrated competence and judgment. 14 people applied in the first week. Marcus Hale did not apply. He had his terms, his schedule, and his work. On a Thursday morning in December, 4 months after the day she had fired him from a factory floor, Elena was in a review meeting for the V1100 program Vantage's next-generation development project when Raymond Cho flagged a thermal management concern in the early prototype design. "We should loop in Marcus on this," Raymond said. Elena looked at the design schematic on the screen in front of her. "Yes," she said, "we should." She was learning. That evening, Marcus and Lily walked home from the bus stop in the December cold, their breath visible in the air, Lily's mittened hand in his. "Did you have a good day?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "A good one. Did you fix something?" He thought about the V1100 schematic, the thermal management note he had sent Raymond by email that afternoon, 3 paragraphs, numbered and specific, annotated where the logic needed to be followed carefully. "I think so," he said. "We'll see." Lily nodded as though this was a satisfactory answer, which it was, because she understood the nature of the work. Some things you fix, and they stay fixed. Some things you fix, and they need watching. The point is that you know the difference, and you keep showing up. They walked in comfortable silence the rest of the way home.